Hello and welcome to my video on my little fish. So what you can see now is my little fish when I first got them. This was 2 months ago. As you can see, they're quite small. There's not all of the fish in that tank, just some of them, but more or less they're all grown to that. They all started off at that size and now they've grown to what they are today. So we're currently 2 months on. They've grown a bit, but not a huge amount. They will be getting into the growing more now because of the temperature of the water has been risen substantially since that point. And that is one of the points that I take to grow the fish on. In fact, I actually use sort of 8 separate points which I want to talk about in this video to get the fish to grow on. So we'll start with water temperature. So these fish are currently at 23 degrees Celsius, which I find is the optimal water temperature for growing your fish. Anything more than that and you're sort of just wasting heat really, it's unnecessary, and you'll get to a point where they actually slow down the growth rate because it's too warm. I find 23 to 24 degrees to be quite an optimal growth rate temperature, and these fish look very happy at that temperature. So that's what I tend to keep them at when I can, when the water quality allows me to get to that temperature. As in, this is a new pond and I've gone through new pond syndrome, and having the new pond syndrome sort of characteristics, you don't want water temperature that warm because it increases the effects of ammonia and nitrite and stuff like that. So you can't raise the temperature up that high when you're having problems with that stuff. I'm getting over that now, so I've raised the temperature up. The next is the food that I feed them. So through this video I'll show you the different foods that I feed them. I do feed them quite a lot of different types of food. We're going to start off here with the normal pellets that they eat. So these are the 2 mil pellets that I feed them. It's a high protein tow-side growing food and they really like it, as you can see. They're quite happy to eat that all day. But I also feed them other things which I'll get to in a bit. So the next important thing is oxygen. As you can see, I always have an air stone in the pond, like so. I also have an air stone in the filtration system, right there. That also mixes up the filtration so there's no settling bits in, it all gets taken out in the drum. And some filters, this one doesn't, but some filters may have an air stone in this chamber. This one's got a static bed filter. If you had a K1 in this chamber like this pond has, then you would have the K1 moving, that also adds oxygen to your pond. So there we go. So that's the filtration, we'll get more into that in a bit. So this is one of the more important things for me, and the one that I find more interesting. So I get a lot of questions saying, why are these fish so active? Why are they so, why do they come up like that? How do I get my fish to come up? So this is what I call a little bit of a dealer trick. It's not really a trick as such. It's what happens is fish love to be in shoals. Koi like to shoal, they like to all group together. And if I had, say, 30 fish in this tank, they would not eat as much, they would not grow as much as they do with 171 fish in this tank, and that is purely because they'd be a little bit more nervous. The more fish you've got in a tank, the more active they are, the more likely they are to come up. So you might come to my tank, say if you were buying one of these koi, you might come to my tank and say, wow, that fish comes up, look, it's biting my finger, they're all biting my finger, that's fantastic, I'll buy that fish. It's really happy, it's a really active fish, and that's why I call it a bit of a dealer trick, because the reason why that fish is doing that is not because it wants to be social or is even a social fish. You might get that home and might never see it again because it might go and hide under your plants. The reason why it's doing that is because there's that many fish about, and it just safety in numbers, it's really confident, and it has to get in there first to get that food. If it's not on the ball with the food, it ain't going to eat. So they need to sort of be on the top, they need to be there first, and that's just how it becomes a dealer trick sort of thing. But also with this is, if you were having water quality problems, say you had a parasite for example, if you had few fish in your tank, they'd all be on the bottom, they'd all be super upset, and you'd be like, something wrong with them fish, they're terrible. I'm not going to buy one, for example. Right. Whereas if these fish got a bit of an issue, they were having a little bit of problem, the water quality weren't good. As you've seen in my new pond syndrome videos, my water quality wasn't very good, but the fish were still incredibly active and really wanted some food, whereas if in normal situations they would not have been eating at all. And it's purely because of the amount of fish in this tank. They just feel more confident together, and that is literally why I can get any sort of food I want, and I do feed them like wholemeal bread every day. It's a good food for them, it keeps them occupied and they enjoy it, and it's just one of the things that, you know, I like to give them. So the actual shoal effect of the amount of fish helps the fish grow. But at the same time, you will notice that some fish don't grow. Obviously we've got these larger fish here, the ones that are all at the top. But if you look carefully, there are a few fish that have not grown, and hopefully I'll be able to find them later on. You know, some fish are quite small still, and they're a little bit more difficult to spot, but we spot them occasionally. So I'll find one of them in a second and show you. So here we go, here's one of the little fish in the tank. See him right there. That fish hasn't grown for whatever reason. It's a little bit difficult to keep track of. But that fish hasn't grown for whatever reason, and is still at the size when I bought them all. It's right there, look. And it's a cute little fish, but some fish just do not grow. And I've actually got one in my main pond that I want to show you. So here we go. Believe it or not, that diddy little fish just there is actually the brother or sister of that fish there and some of the others in this tank. So it's also related to that one and that one sort of underneath there getting some food. They are all brothers and sisters. So how come that fish is pushing 2 feet where the other one is not even pushing a foot? And it's just one of them things that happens. It's not, see, as I said earlier, what I will do is when some of those fish get bigger, they will move on to my other quarantine tank system right there. I know it's a smaller tank, but there'll be fewer fish in it, and I'll be keeping them warm and they'll be still happy in there and eating well. So the smaller ones will then stay in that other tank and they'll be still eating, and that'll mean that the smaller ones actually just to manage to keep ahead of the bigger ones. Because what would normally happen is if I left all those fish in that tank for a period of time, that little fish you saw in the other tank would stay little because it wouldn't be able to get the food because the others would take it off it, and then the fish like these, which do grow really well, will eat it. And basically the principle is if it'll fit in their mouth and they can chew it, they will eat it. So because I've taken the bigger ones out of that tank previously and separated them before they got big enough to actually fit the little ones in the mouth, they didn't get eaten. And that's why there's such a small fish in this tank that is actually the same age of some of the bigger ones in this tank. In fact, brother or sister. And that's just how fish spawnings work. So fish have thousands of, they lay thousands of eggs, and thousands of fish can be born from them eggs. But some of the fish are just genetically designed to be eaten by the other fish, so that the other fish can grow on. It's just sort of a natural sort of thing. And by my sort of process of sorting the fish, I sort of reduce, the natural process of them eating each other. It may get eaten if it literally stays at that small size for too much longer. It may get eaten. It's a sad thought. It may one day disappear, but that's just how it goes with the little fish. Sometimes they just don't grow and you're unlucky. But most of the time, the ones you get at that size, unless you have a fry yourself and you're trying to grow on fry, most of the ones that you will buy as small fish have already gone through that stage, and you will get only one. I've probably got about 5 in that 170 fish tank. Only about 5 of them what could actually be eaten by the other fish at some point. So now I want to talk about the actual filtration of a growing on tank or a quarantine tank. Now this filter, as some of you might know, is a very good filter. If you've ever seen one and used one before, it is absolutely superb, and I am very pleased with this filter, and that's why I own 3 of them. They are just, for me there's nothing better, and the reason for that is simple. It has a large biological chamber there. There's enough media in that chamber for a 40,000 litre pond, so that'd do my main pond. And that is a hell of a lot of media and processing sort of material there, which enables me to overstock this pond and feed them as heavily as I like. Secondly, we have the actual drum itself, which hopefully isn't going to go off in a second and wet my camera through, but this actual drum filters out any small particles and that as soon as the fish create them, realistically, and then my system has them going into this tank for now. I haven't currently got a drain set up, so it goes into this tank, and then this tank overflows down that small soakaway there. I just can't let that muck go through, so every now and then I have to take the muck out, but you can see the muck that is filtered out by the drum filter. Now a normal filtration may have this muck settling in the filter chamber of the actual filter, so that muck would be still in the water, still polluting the water, and that's one of the advantages of the drum. The muck is taken out straight away and put somewhere else where it can't be a detriment to the pond and can't be affecting the pond at all. So that itself enables me to feed the fish as much as I like. Obviously if you've not got this type of filtration, you've got something like a Nexus, it just means you're going to have to clean it a hell of a lot more if you want them like feeding levels that I will get with this filtration. And then also another point while I'm here is the actual turnover rate of this pond. Now there are a few different reasons why I chose this turnover rate. This pond, all the water in this pond is a 1,000 gallon pond. It has a 2,000 gallon an hour pump on it, so all the water of this pond goes through this filter once every half an hour. And what that means is that it's quite a good suction rate on the drain, on the bottom drain, so anything that gets stuck on the bottom, any muck or oat, will get sucked in there straight away and straight away be taken out. Because all the water goes through every half an hour, the actual biological stage sees quite a lot of the water flow through it and then keeps quite active in that situation. Another advantage from that high flow rate is something that you don't quite see unless you really look for it. Now there is the inlet, there's just one inlet, it's a 2-inch pipe, it comes in about a foot under the water and goes on a 90-degree and points that way. So the water is turning round like that and it's going anti-clockwise around this tank. And what that does is it makes the fish swim, so the fish are constantly sort of moving against that current. Now this has obviously got effects. It keeps the fish healthy, keeps them lean, it keeps them moving and active and excited. It also adds to the sort of willingness for them to eat, stuff like that. The disadvantage of that is that they can't really settle down. So how I've sort of set up this tank is here, around where the water inlet is, it is actually a sort of soft spot. So down here in the water level, the fish can all sit on the bottom, and you will see them on a night time all sat on the bottom in that corner, because that's where there's least current. So they do get to rest. That's one thing you've got to think about when doing that. Yes, you want that sort of run to go around, but you also need them to be able to rest, or they'll just burn off all the energy that they got out of the food and never actually get any bigger. You can actually see it with the air stone. The air stone does sort of coil. If you look, you can see that it spins around itself because of the water moving around so fast. And every now and then you'll hear them bubbles. See, it's like a little tornado just there coming up, and that's what that bubbling sound is. Every now and then it sort of coils so fast that it makes that bubbling noise. But yeah, the fish are able to sleep in this sort of area here, because of how I've positioned the inlet right at the top almost. So one thing I just want to quickly mention is that all these things about growing on fish are really more relevant to smaller fish under 2 years old, such as the ones in the other quarantine tank. And the reason for that is when they're under 2 years old, you can keep them at 23 degrees Celsius all the time. It makes no difference. You can feed them high protein food all the time. It makes no difference as long as your filters can cope with it and stuff like that. It makes no difference. However, when they get over 2 years old and they become mature, I find it important that they know the seasonal changes, so they start to experience an actual change between summer and winter. Now these fish are in an indoor pond which is not directly heated, but because it's indoor and the building is heated, it is 15 degrees in the middle of winter, when an equivalent outdoor pond that wasn't heated would be actually at about 5 degrees if you were lucky. Now one of the things I've got to point out is that I don't feed these fish high protein food, and the reason for that is because they would just put that high protein food into their eggs, and that's no good for me. It's costing me money for them to just have more eggs, and it's no good for them, it's just bad for their health at that point. Now when you've got a pond that isn't heated at all and say it were 5 degrees Celsius, the actual fish would be ingesting them eggs, and that's why female fish are bigger than male fish in ponds that are not heated at all, because they ingest their eggs. Now these fish in this pond, the temperature in the summer is 25 degrees Celsius, so there is a noticeable difference between summer and winter, and when they get to that 25 degrees Celsius they might spawn. And I always make sure they spawn so that they're not egg bound and they don't die from rancid eggs stuck inside them. So I don't feed these fish that are over 2 years high protein food. I don't think it's necessary. Now don't get me wrong, they do get mussels, they do get shrimp, they do get black flies, they do get them sort of things, so that is their high protein sort of diet. But their normal balanced diet that their fish feeder feeds them is sake ikari balance, which is a more balanced food rather than something that is a high growth rate food. I don't find that necessary for fish that are able to spawn, and I don't think you should really feed that sort of high growth food to these sort of fish. They may grow a little bit better, but you won't see much growth rate more. And also the fish that are this size don't actually grow at the same rate as a small fish. So in the first 2 years of their life, if you're feeding them high protein food and giving them hot, warm, keeping them warm, then that will give them a lot better advantage for later on in life than getting really big, because they will have gotten as big as they possibly could in the period of time when they were growing the most that they'll ever grow in their life. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out, that most of the growth tactics that I'm talking about are really specific to little fish and should not be done with fish that are able to lay eggs and mature fish. There we go. So this is another one of my recommendations if you're keeping the pond at a high temperature, and that is to simulate the light it would experience when it would normally be at that temperature. So it's currently dark outside, and if your pond is 23 degrees Celsius, it's probably the middle of the summer, somewhere, quite long days, so you can say the longest day of the year. So the longest day of the year you would probably get light from, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, something like that, somewhere around that. So you could set your pond to mimic that, and then your fish will sort of think it's the longest day of the year every day, and that'll just help their colours, their quality, the skin and stuff like that. It will also enable growth of algae and stuff like that, and you can see it around the bottom of the tank here and around here. So I have this pond lit up by 4 10-watt LED lights, and this timer thing controls them here. What it is, it's like a day and night sensor, but it's also got a timer built into it. I think it turns on at 7 o'clock in the morning, this one, and turns off at 10 o'clock at night, so I just sort of postponed it a bit later on in the day. But that's just one of my recommendations. My main pond isn't really done like that, and I do notice that all the algae dies back, and I don't kind of like that. And then there's also lights in the building them ones, they're switched on and off. The others can also be switched on and off, but obviously when the sensor's on you can't actually turn them off. So there we go. Light is quite an important thing if you're going to be keeping your pond warm. I feel like you do need to have the same light levels. Also, this is what this tank looks like when it's properly covered up. This polycarbonate really keeps the heat in. If I have this polycarbonate off, it gets very warm in here. Obviously it is a room, but I don't want to be heating this room, it's pointless. So I want to keep as much heat in this tank as absolutely possible. So there you go, that's the lighting bit. So another thing I want to talk about is the water itself. It is really important to keep on top of the water quality, and one way of doing that is water changes. So you really need to keep the pheromones and hormones level of the pond down, which the fish produce all the time. And the only way to do that is actually changing the water. So how do you change the water in a pond like this? Well, the best way to do it is a trittle. Now, I actually don't do a trittle in this pond at the minute. I haven't got one set up. It being winter, I don't want to sort of mess about with water at this point, so I'm leaving it till spring. But currently I use this system with aqua rolls, and I've got these 2 water tanks, and what I do is I leave them overnight in the fish house where it's warm, full of water, and then in the morning I'll put them in here and then fill them back up again, let them warm up, and then put them in here, and I sort of do that. It's a bit laborious and a bit painful task, but it's good exercise, whatever. And but the reason I do that is because pouring in large amounts of tap water in here will significantly reduce the water temperature. So, and that's just not something I want. I don't want to do that. So if I put in, say I do a 10% water change once a week, that once a week I'm going to put in a hell of a lot of cold water out the tap. The water out the tap's probably coming out about 5 degrees, whereas the water in this pond's 23, so it'll drop it quite substantially, which is just not good for your fish at all. So that's the reason why a trittle is the best idea, because it actually dilutes quicker than you can sort of notice that it's actually cooling the water down. And then with my main pond is actually trickling in currently like this, and you know, that's a decent flow rate, but also the other quarantine tank also gets a trittle, and it's probably a similar amount of water. And the reason for that is that the little quarantine tank is a small tank with a large volume of fish in it compared to the tank, so it just needs that higher turnover rate than perhaps the actual main pond might need. So realistically, for a quarantine tank, you're probably looking at something about 10% a day. Wouldn't be particularly unreasonable, depending on your actual filtration and stuff like that. You can bring it down, but a main pond you're looking at 10% a week, which would be fine for that, but you want to have it more than that for something like this, a quarantine tank. Currently I've got this at 10% a week. Obviously I know exactly how much water I'm putting in because I've got to carry it around here, but I do want to raise that up in spring, but I'm a bit limited by how much water I can currently carry around and heat up at one point. So that's just something to notice with water changes. They're really important, but putting cold water in all in one go is just not a good idea. So here we are with the main diet that I feed them. This one is the pellet, which you saw me feed them earlier. It's a 2 mil pellet, and it's specifically for growing tosi, and it's really high protein, so 44%, and that's why I like it. It's really good for growing on the little fish, and also the size of it's pretty good. 2 or 3 mil pellet, and you're pretty good, and easy to digest, easy for them to swallow and chew and that, so you're not having any problems with that. And then we've got freshwater shrimp. They get this all the time as well, same as the pellet. And this one's a little bit more protein, but again it's one of them higher sort of growth things, and really good for them. And I like to mix it up. I don't like to feed the same things all the time. Like I do give them brown bread or wholemeal bread as well, stuff like that. And then in this one we've got Daphnia, which is like dust. I fed them this a lot when I first got them, but not so much now. They probably get this once a day, probably before the lights turn off and before they go to bed. but not so much now. But let's give them a bit to eat. Give them some pellets. Put a few shrimp in there. So that's my video on growing on little fishes. If you have any questions, please comment them below and I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. And if you liked it, please like it, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please subscribe, and I shall see you in the next video.